on mute as we go through, just to avoid any kind of echoes or whatnot that might come back through people's laptops. So just going to pop everyone, apart from myself, on mute for now. Matt started the recording, so that's perfect. Right, so essentially what we're going to do is we are going to show, first of all, the Concur home screen. So essentially what you would tend to do is you're either going to utilize your desktop or, for example, your mobile device in order to create the expenses. So where will be all around, first of all, your initial login to your expense account, first of all. So just going to pop this up. So essentially everyone's going to be provided a login ID and a password in which they can use to log into Concur. So there'll be a Concur login URL which is provided to the user base, and that will be kind of your first point of call when you initially want to log into Concur and initiate kind of filling in your expense profile and whatnot. So I'm actually going to be demonstrating the system, your actual configuration today, as opposed to one of our demo sites. So it will be specifically how you're going to see the system once it's been rolled out. So first of all, what I'm doing is I'm going to get my login ID, which would tend to be your email addresses. First of all, I've got a test user which I'll be utilizing today. So you've got the Concur home screen with obviously the username, and you've got the option of potentially if you forgot your password, for example, you can click the forgot your username, or if you get through to the password area, you've also got the forgot your password option as well. So essentially there is the central login ID, and that's what we're utilizing. Upon the login to Concur, what you're going to notice is that there's various options across the screen. So as of today, you can see that this is your system with your logo, and essentially there's some tabs and whatnot on the home page that you're able to see some information on. So what we've got is the tabs across the top. You've got an expense area. So if you click the expense tab, you'll be able to see all of your open expense reports or claims. So as you can see here, we've created some test ones already, and some of the team have actually logged into this already and started creating some expenses just to see how the system would work. This would, in essence, be any open reports that you've got, any reports that you might have already submitted for approval, or you can also see any of your historic claims as well. So you're able to go back to all of your active claims, and there's various different options to go back and see that information. You've also got an app center option here, so you could potentially link some of your own Uber taxi accounts, for example, if you wanted to see some of that information flowing into Concur. The key part of the desktop and the part of the initial login will be to actually access your own profiles and just ensuring that the information which is stored within the profile is correct. So in order to do this, you'd want to go into the profile option on the right hand side and go into the profile settings. You can also see there is an option for signing out there as well. So within the profile, what it's key to do is, as I said, make sure that all of the information stored in there is correct. So you can just go in and make sure your personal information is correct, your first name, last name and whatnot has been entered. You can populate contact information if necessary. But one of the key things really here is to ensure that you verified your email address. So what you can do is you can verify this, and what that allows you to do is actually send various amounts of information directly via your email. So for example, if a hotel was sent you an itinerary or a hotel bill, what you can do from your verified email address is actually forward that to receipts@concur.com, or also to the expense it tool, which I'm going to demonstrate a bit later. So essentially what it will do is it will ask you to verify your email address via an email link, which will be sent directly to the email that you are looking to verify. Your email will be your company email address. So you could potentially add additional ones if necessary, maybe a personal email address if you felt that was needed. You've also got some additional information in here as well. So you've got your own employee ID numbers and also contact information stored there. The next item will be around the actual expense settings themselves. So all of the user base will be associated to a company and also to a department. And we've got a reimbursement method of company check. So essentially you'll be getting paid via your normal payroll process. The next area is delegates. So delegates are essentially people you can act on behalf of or people who can act on your behalf. So in the event where you are an approver and you're going on holiday, for example, for 2 weeks, rather than delaying people's approvals, you could request that another individual within the business may act on your behalf during that time. So you have the ability to search for other users within the business and provide them roles which are equivalent of your own. So they could potentially prepare your own expense claims, they could submit them, and they could also receive the emails. So there's various options in there too. The next one's around preferences. And one of the key ones which I would always recommend here is looking at Expense Assistant. So Expense Assistant essentially allows you to have expenses bulk into, for example, a monthly expense report. It saves their kind of creating expenses and letting them sit there. It automatically put them all into one report for a month, ready to be submitted at the month end, for example. You've also got some options about preferences about when you want to receive emails or potentially prompts as well. So I definitely recommend reading through all of this information. You will be able to see your default approver in the system here. And then you also have the options around setting up your cars. So if you are a company car user, for example, you can come into the company car registration. You'd need to click new. You can identify any vehicle ID that you potentially would like to. My recommendation would be to use the registration plate of the vehicle and populate that. So, and what you'll need to do is make sure you're selecting the correct vehicle type as well, because this is going to drive the mileage rates which are utilized in the system. So we tend to, in the company car area, we tend to follow the same company car rates provided by HMRC. So what that would do is it will give you a certain amount of pence depending on the vehicle size and also the fuel type. You also have the ability to set preferred cars. So, for example, the most common time that would happen would be in the personal car area. So you may have 2 vehicles within the household that you utilize on a frequent basis. So you could potentially set 2 of these up in the system as well. If you know one of them is your preferred vehicle, you can click the is preferred option out of the 2, like so. So when you go to create personal car mileage, for example, in the expense area, the preferred vehicle will be the one which is most commonly used. You've also got the favorite attendees. So there might be attendees within the business group that you tend to go out with on a more frequent basis. So you could potentially create those in your own profile as well, just in order to make the utilization of your time when creating expenses a lot easier. Other options within the profile is system settings. So you may have different preferences about how you want to see the information within the system itself. So that might be a language, that might be the date format, time format, and so on. So it's just good to just have a look through and just make sure you're happy with the information which is stored within this. One of the key ones, again, in the profile settings is about the mobile registration. So we would always recommend when you're on the go, take photos of your receipts and create the expense claims when you're traveling around. So what we'd suggest is upon your initial login to the Concur screen is make sure that you have set up your email address and also done the mobile registration. So just populating your email address within here and pressing get started will send your email address, the link you need. So if you log into your mobile device and have your emails open, you can quite quickly register, download the app and have it available on your device. You could also just download the app directly from the App Store and log in utilizing the same login credentials that you would tend to use for the desktop app itself. Is there any questions regarding that? Perfect. Okay, so what we do now is we just go back into the expense area. I am going to go on to the mobile device shortly, but I'm just going to quickly show you some of the existing claims and how it appears from a desktop perspective. As I spoke about earlier, the expense assistant option will appear during your kind of initial login to the system. And it's just informing you about how we can have claims built for you. So just bulking things like your expenses together for a monthly basis, for example. So it's definitely worthwhile having that built into your own profile. So what you'd do is, if we wanted to create a new expense, for example, here, if we used October as an example, I've just gone out today and I've just traveled up to London, for example. I could create an expense claim and I can name it October, for example, October 2020 expenses. Essentially, the claim date will be the date in which you have created the expense claim. You could potentially enter a business purpose. So it might be a reason that you've traveled in that particular time period. And you could potentially also just provide comments as required as well. So my example here will be a meeting in London. You can see the company that you belong to and also your default department as well, which is stored within the claim header. So you would click next. What will happen is it's going to open up a new claim for you. On the right hand side, what you'll see is any expenses that potentially you've already created as you've traveled around, took photos of, and you're able to actually add these onto the expense report if necessary. If we was just solely looking at the manual creation of the expenses, you can press new expense here, which will bring up a list of the expense types. So as you're traveling around and having expenditure taking place, you'll have this for various different reasons. As you can see, there is a wide range of expense types which can be utilized within the system itself. So things like airfare, hotel, travel, parking, meals, mileage, a wide variety of them. So there are various options in which you can use here. And what I'll do is I'm going to go back onto the mobile device shortly, just to show you the easiest way to claim the expenses there and to create them based off of the receipts that you've got. You've also got various options across the top. So you've got details, which will essentially take you back to things like the claim header. So if you needed to amend a business purpose, you can definitely do that. You can see the approval status of a claim, the comments, and again, the company information that's stored in there. You've also able to see any receipt information which is stored on the system. And in the event that you might have lost a receipt, you can potentially utilize a missing receipt declaration, which is essentially a digital image which acknowledges that you've actually lost the receipt and are unable to obtain another one. The printing of the emails, this essentially will show you kind of a detailed report of the expense claim. And again, once we've filled in some of the expenses, I will definitely show you that. I am just going to switch now to the mobile device and start showing you how to create some expenses. Okay, so now everyone should be able to see my screen, my mobile screen. So essentially, again, what I will do is I will show you the login process. So if you was to initially log on to Concur on your mobile device, you might have done the mobile registration. If not, you can log in directly utilizing the mobile device and your login credentials that you have today. So again, just populating the information with the test user account. Essentially, that log you into the mobile screen, as you can see here. Again, what we've got is you've got various options across the screen, right? You can see your open expense claims. So there is a direct link between the mobile app and the web app. So where we've just gone in to the desktop and created the October 2020 expenses, you're able to access that same report. Obviously, it's up to date as well. So between the two, if you've made amendments on the desktop and log on to your phone, you're going to see the updates there. If we go back, you can also see a list of any expenses that you may have created when moving around. And then there's a few key options which really upon your initial login to your mobile device, we would make clear to you as well. So at the bottom, you've got the expense it option. So essentially expense it is taking a photo of the receipt, and it allows our OCR technology to actually pre-populate some of the expense information on your behalf. I will show you that when we come to start creating some of the expenses themselves. You've also got the option potentially to manually create an expense. I mean, as you've got the expense tool, I wouldn't recommend manually creating the expenses. On the go, I'd always recommend utilizing that expense it option with the camera. The other product that has been purchased and enables the users to have a lot more of a streamlined process is the mileage tool called Drive. So Drive essentially allows you to capture your mileage as you're on the move. So essentially, if you got into your car, you could press start, and it will, as you drive around on behalf of the business, it's going to track your mileage on your behalf, obviously making it easier to fill in your expense reports in the back end. So what we can do is we can press get started, and we can enable Concur Drive. So it will ask you for your location, because essentially it's going to be tracking you as you drive around, but there are multiple options in case you don't want to be tracked throughout the day. So we've got the whilst using, so I'm just going to amend this to always. It should be working. And yeah, okay, so essentially what we've got here is we've got the various options that we have for the drive feature itself. So what you can do is, if you are quite a frequent driver on behalf of the business, is you can click scheduled, and what that will bring up is it will bring up each day of the week, and it will allow you to actually schedule in certain hours of the day in which you would be driving on behalf of the business. So for example, if my day started at 7:30 and finished at 5 p.m. on a Monday, I could configure that into the Drive tool. So essentially it's kind of a set it and forget about it. So what will happen is, as you drive on behalf of the business within the days that have been selected, the mileage will get tracked, and you're able to add that onto your expense claims once complete. You can potentially, if you knew you was going to be off on certain days, you could potentially remove the days in which you wasn't going to work. You also have the options at the bottom. So the add in directly to the expenses. So that means if you conduct drive and mileage in a certain day, and you just want it to feed straight into your expense claims, you can click that option and it will do that for you. You could potentially leave it off. So as you go through and complete mileage during the day, you're going to have separate journeys which take place. And essentially, if you've got that turned off, you can actually see them within the list of expenses, and you're able to remove certain legs of trips if they're not business related, for example. You've also got a traffic mode, so that will ensure that even when you're stopping in traffic, that you have the ability for the mileage to continue, so it doesn't think that it's going to be two separate journeys in the event where you're stopped for a certain amount of time, as an example. And you can also improve the accuracy by activating the use of Bluetooth, connecting it to your vehicles, and also motion detecting as well. So that's the scheduled option. You also have the user initiated. So user initiated would essentially be, I get into my vehicle today and I then press the start option. I then conduct my mileage and arrive at the office or arrive at a customer site, for example. And at that point, what I would do is I would press stop. In essence, what that would do is create one mileage trip. So it's a very simple option for the drive feature, but it's definitely one which a lot of our customer base tends to utilize. Okay, so essentially that's the drive feature and how to enable that. What we will now do is we'll go into the actual creation of some of the expenses. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up my claim to show you that again, there is no expenses in there today. What I will do is I'm going to create a mileage claim manually. At the moment, I haven't got a an option around utilizing drive, because obviously I'm not in my vehicle today. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to add a route. So this allows me, once I've got my personal car arranged, essentially you're going to see some information within the expenses that you need to fill in. With regards to the personal car mileage, if you don't utilize drive, you will be able to utilize the map tool as well. So for example, I could log in and I could say London. We'd tend to recommend to use postcodes. And if I just said I was going London to Manchester, that's going to populate a route for me. In doing so, it's provided me 208 miles of the mileage trip. What you can see is a lot of the information is being pre-filled in. So you have the ability, if necessary, to amend the transaction type. So if I actually conducted this mileage on the 19th, I can amend that and populate the 19th there. Based on the mileage which has been conducted with this vehicle, I'm receiving an amount of £24.96. What I can then do is I can select the receipt status. So because it's mileage, I might not have a receipt because obviously there's no vendor. So that's kind of the information which will be stored within the receipt status. Is if you had a receipt for the mileage, you could potentially add it into the expense line itself. What we've got is the vehicle types as well. So earlier on I spoke about preferred vehicles and the ability to set those within the profile. So what you can see here is I've actually got two vehicles. So if I didn't drive Matt's C car, for example, I could amend to the other vehicle. And what you can see is because that vehicle actually has a different mileage rate, you can see the amount has actually been amended there from the £24 to the £20.80. For this example, I'm just going to keep on the Matt C car, and I'm going to essentially save this. So what you can now see is that the personal car mileage has actually been populated within the expense claim itself. So essentially what this has now given me is an amount that I'm due to be reimbursed. So you can actually see that within the details as well. So you can see the amount that is due to yourself, the employee. And what you can actually see at the top of my screen at the moment would be an exception message. So that means there's a potential action which I need to take. In reading this, it says the VAT has not been recovered for the expense, and it's around adding fuel receipts. So essentially within Concur, we have a fuel for mileage option, which allows the business to then recover the VAT on mileage itself. So I've already created a fuel for mileage expense line, and I'm going to add that to the claim. So essentially, as you are traveling around and you are filling your car up with fuel, my recommendation would be to always enter the fuel receipts into Concur, because it allows the business to actually recover. It allows the business to recover the VAT on the fuel itself. So the fuel should always match the vehicle which you have conducted the mileage in as well. And in order to ensure that the VAT is recoverable, we should check whether a tax receipt has been provided as well. So you have the ability to amend the receipt status. And what our audit team will do is actually review the receipt status as well. So for example, you selected receipt and our audit team actually looked at it and said it is an actual tax receipt, then we have the ability to amend that. So in this example, we've got a receipt which we've already put through as an expense. And essentially what I've done is I've attached that onto our claim. So in doing so, what you've noticed is the expense exception, the yellow warning message, which was previously there, has now disappeared. So that means we've carried out an action in order to remove that. What I'm now going to do is we've conducted our mileage and we've driven to Manchester, for example. We've then attached a fuel receipt to cover the VAT on that. What I'm now going to do is I'm going to take a picture of the breakfast that I had that day. So in order to do so, you have a couple of options. You can either create the expense manually, which I wouldn't recommend, or as you're traveling around, as I said, is we'd look at utilizing the expense tool. So as soon as you've purchased your food or whatnot, you have the receipt. What I would suggest doing is always, as soon as you get the receipt, click the expense it option, which will allow you to have, it'll give you an option of looking at the receipt. So if I've got a receipt on my screen at the moment, I can take a picture of this. Essentially, it will ask you to crop this, and apologies because I haven't got any real receipts where we haven't really been traveling around at the moment. I can crop this image, and essentially what expense it will do is it will actually, utilizing the OCR technology, attempt to read the receipt itself. So I don't know if that's froze. Essentially what it's asked me is £7.70 the correct amount? And although the image is blurry, it's still been able to see that £7.70 is exactly what it was. So if I click done now, what that's going to do is it's actually going to evaluate the information. And essentially, if you was traveling, for example, you could close the app, and what will happen once it's finished analyzing is that you will get a notification which will say it is now being completed. So I've taken a photo of this receipt, and as you can see, what it's done is it's picked up the supplier, which is Pret. It hasn't picked up a location, so we would have to enter that. So we can enter that in here. And if I typed in Manchester, for example.
Casey, just hold on one moment. There's a couple that don't seem to be able to see the screen that you're sharing. Is anyone else having an issue viewing the screen?
No, I'm all clear. I can see everything.
Yeah, I can see the screen.
Okay. Not sure why it might not be showing for some. But as I mentioned at the start, we are recording. I've got the recording coming from my screen with everything showing. So hopefully the screen will pop up for those that can't currently see it. But if it's continuing to be an issue, then there will be the recording for you to review afterwards.
Yeah. So essentially what I then have the option from Expense to do is move it to an open claim. As you can see, I've got my October 2020 expenses. So what I'll do is I'll actually move that into my October expenses. As you can see, what now happens is I've got the options in here. So it's added it to the claim. It's come up with a couple of warnings. And essentially what I need to do is just make sure I try and action them. Essentially what it's pre-done is it's pre-populated an expense type for us, which is business meeting stroke minor subsistence. It's breakfast, so I'm on my way to a meeting. If for whatever reason you felt that that expense type was not correct, you can actually amend that expense type as well. So if you felt there was a more relevant expense type that the OCR technology potentially hasn't picked up, is you can amend that yourself. And if necessary, what will happen is if you continuously change the same receipts to a particular expense type, is that the OCR technology will learn the more you use it. So I'm going to leave it as the minor subsistence option that we've got, because that is the most relevant for the expense line itself. What we've then got is the various different options which we've got. So it's utilize pay, we've got the vendor in there. But what we will need to populate will be the receipt status. So if, for example, you evaluated the receipt itself and you felt it was a tax receipt, so the VAT numbers on there is a VAT amount, you've got the date and the various different tax requirements, you can again potentially choose the tax receipt option in here, which will allow the business to reclaim the VAT, which is being calculated in the back end of the system. Essentially, what we'll then do is I've bought my parking and I've actually bought my breakfast and I've arrived at the destination. We've also got the ability with regards to the parking options, and I'm going to go from my existing expense list and add in another item that I've already used expense it for, and I'm going to add that to my claim. So it's been added to the expense claim, and essentially what we have is, again, the receipt status. So we're going to select tax receipt, but what you're going to notice is there's going to be some expense types where some additional information is required. So parking, for example, is definitely one of those. And the reason for that is we have to select whether it's on street or off street. In this scenario, it was a Heathrow. It was a Heathrow expense, so parking parking receipt for an airport. So essentially I know that it was off-street parking. So I can come in here, press off-street, hit save, and essentially that would be kind of the parking expense complete. So there will be some additional expense types where additional tax fields may be required. And it's just a case of evaluating those fields as and when you create the expenses. You will receive a warning message if one's not populated. So if you do miss it during the initial creation of the expense, it's not something to be too alarmed about. You can always go back and populate it again. The next one that we'll look at, and parking again is one of the more simple expense types. The next one that I'm going to look at will be hotels. So I've actually got an image of a hotel receipt. And again, what I would always recommend, as I have already recommended at the start of the call, is to utilize Expenseit. So again, I've got an image of a hotel receipt here. I'm going to take a picture of it. And in the event where you can see the receipt's been cut off by Expenseit, you can just simply drag the squares and the circles just to make sure that the whole receipt has been incorporated for Expenseit to evaluate the information. In the event where the amount, for example, isn't being picked up correctly, you can potentially amend that if necessary. And you could use that as an option. So you can see the breakdown. So we have already got this one in here, and I'm just going to add it to the claim as well. So it is hotel overseas. So it was a hotel in Seattle. So it's actually picked up the location. As it's picked up the location, it's actually also picked up the currency as well. So essentially what you can see in here will be that it will be in US dollars. And essentially what we use in Concur is Awanda, which is an exchange rate provider, which will take any foreign currency and bring it back into GBP or your own reimbursement currency. What you'll also need to ensure with the hotels is that the hotel bill has actually been itemized as well. So as you can see on the bill here, there's a breakdown of the actual room rates, the taxes and so on, and also things like beverages. Expenseit will look to itemize those as best as it can. So as you can see in here, it's actually pre-populated the itemized bill out, with the exception of, I believe, $2, which is incorrect. So we just need to double check and make sure against the hotel bill, what was the correct expenditure. So we know that there was some hotel taxes on there, which may or may not be on the items. So we've just got hotel in here. So we've got the receipt. So I'm just going to add the receipt in here. So I'm just going to add the receipt status receipt, and that will actually copy down to the itemizations as well from the parent line, which would eliminate a lot of the error messages that potentially we are seeing in the system. Again, so the errors that you can see here at the moment are all around the itemizations. So again, just making sure in comparison to the hotel bill, it's just a case of going through that and ensuring some of these are correct. So I am going to quickly populate some of this information. Again, there was some room taxes which were on there, so you can enter the hotel overseas options. And I know for this night, for example, it should have been £36.50. So the itemization in comparison to what was on the bill would have been incorrect. So it's just a case of making sure that we update all of those. So again, what Expenseit actually does look to itemize as much as it can as possible in order to save you some time here. So things like amounts, dates and whatnot, they're predetermined, obviously based on the receipt. So that's all information which we can just save. And essentially we're just going through and making sure that there are no red flags on any of the line items, which is essentially kind of completing the hotel bill itself. So the itemization's in there. One of the things which you probably will call out is around the exchange rate. So in the event, for example, where you've used your own personal debit card, credit card, your own bank provider may have provided you a different exchange rate. So it might be the case that you just need to double check your bank statements against what our Rwanda provider is actually providing. So for example, it could be less than the amount in GBP that you have on the expense line. So it's a case of ensuring the exchange rate provided has been amended. So you could change that, for example. So that's the hotel itemizations. One of the things which I will call out is there are also some other limits within the system as well. So based on your expense policy, for example, in London, you might have a different hotel limit to what you do in the rest of the region, for example. So in doing so, there will be a potential warning on the UK expense one. Itemization is required. So again, you can just say that we checked in for one night. The room rate was £120. And essentially that's making sure it's all there. So that's good. So there is an itemization flag which has appeared. And what you can see here, for example, is the hotel limit for this city is £110. So you just need to make sure that where you might be exceeding any kind of limits set by the business, that you can add any commentary. That could go to the actual approver just to help them with their decisions around the expense approvals. The next expense type, so we've kind of spoke about the hotel there. The next expense type that I will show you will be around entertainment, so things like meals. So I have already utilized expense again for a meal receipt. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add this into our claim. And as you can see, we've got one. So it's Prezzo, for example, meal UK and UK employees only. Again, just making sure that we've filled in the necessary information. So where the actual expense was occurred, what the receipt status of the receipt is. And also you can see here, there's a meals type. Again, it drives the tax. So what you've got is a restaurant meal or hot takeaway and other foods and snacks. We've got other foods and snacks in here as an example. We can hit save. One of the things that we will need to do when it comes to any kind of entertainment expenses will be the attendees option. So essentially what we're ensuring here is that the number of guests which attended a meal or an entertainment is actually populated. So it's just going into that attendees option. And as you can see, you will always be defaulted into an expense yourself, but it's just a case of ensuring that we then add additional people onto it. So there are various options in which you can do this. So if, for example, you had a Outlook meeting already arranged or a meeting in your personal phone calendar with other team members, is you can actually press add from calendar, select the meeting, and it will pre-populate the attendees with everyone who's within that calendar invite. You also have the ability to select from a contact of your own phone. You could potentially add a person manually. So that might be the case in which you've got, let's say, a business guest. So what I'll do is I'll just use myself as an example. Is you might be taking myself out for a dinner, for example. And in here, what we'll do is we just make sure that we're storing the individual's actual attendee details. So last name, first name, attendee title may potentially be another option in here as well. So you could say, for example, director. In pressing save, what that's going to do is it's going to look at the expense details for the meal, for example, and split the cost across the number of individuals within that within that entertainment. So what I will always double check if I was populating my expenses will be the number of guests on the actual receipt as well. So for example here, and that's very small, but you can see that that is 3 guests. So essentially I need to ensure that I'm putting 3 attendees on this expense claim. So again, just going into the attendees, at the moment I've got 2 people. The last option what I have is around searching for attendees. So we can actually search for other individuals within the business as well. So if I utilize the employee search option, I can type in anything that I need to. For example, if you have an individual's first name, in this scenario, what I'll do is I'll search for test. And as you can see, anyone with a first name that you search would actually populate as an option. So you can select an individual, potentially look at their details, but what you do is you press select attendee to add, select the individuals that you might need, and add the attendee onto the expense. So what you can then see is I've got my 3 attendees on the expense itself, and the cost is being split across us 3. I can then save that expense, and essentially that will be my expense report complete. So what you want to do is make sure any other warnings potentially have been dealt with. You can see there's quite a few in here, mainly because of historic transaction dates. So a lot of the receipts I've used today are from previous years. So essentially, if you're doing up-to-date transactions, these won't appear in there. And you can actually submit the report. So what will happen is it will ask you just to confirm that you're happy to submit the expense claim and making sure that it's all within the company policy. In attempting to submit this, if you've got any red warnings on the actual claim itself, it will not let you progress without essentially dealing with those. So because this hotel bill has got a red warning message, I still can't submit the expense. So it's just going in and making sure that I've ensured that I've attached receipts and whatnot. So here I haven't updated a receipt onto the actual hotel bill. So I can attach a missing receipt declaration potentially as well in here. So if I've lost a receipt, I could potentially use that. For now, I'm just going to take a picture just to attach a blank image for now. And in doing so, I can resave the line. I can then resubmit my expense claim. So what that's then done is submitted, and it's now awaiting my manager's approval, for example. So as you can see, you are able to go back into the expenses once you've submitted it, and you can also see the historic report statuses. So you can see that some of them are still pending approval, some have been fully approved, and you can see any kind of historic ones which are no longer active at all, so they've been fully processed. What I'll now do is I'm just going to quickly go back onto the desktop just to show you essentially from that perspective how it would look to the user base again. So let me take back the access. And this is logging in again as the desktop. So what I'll do is I'll go into my open claims, and I can see that I've submitted this, right? So I can see my submitted October expenses. Within the desktop itself, you can see any kind of additional warning messages. So there's a lot about transaction dates being historic, but you wouldn't have to worry about those. But there are additional rules which you might want to ensure that you've checked around. So there's hotel limits for UK, for overseas and whatnot. So if we look into the details, so one of the key ones will be looking at where your expense claim may be in the approval flow. So in this scenario, I've submitted my claim and I know that it's gone to my manager. So in this scenario, it's the test approver. In your scenario, it would probably be your default line manager who would then be responsible for approving the expenses themselves. What I'm going to do on behalf of anyone who potentially is going to be approving these reports as well is I am going to show you how that appears for the approvers. At the same time, what I want to do is I'm just going to put through another kind of test claim to show you how it would appear if you were to actually recall or actually refuse or return an expense back to an employee of the business. So I'm just going to create a basic postage expense in the desktop itself. And you can see the additional options as well. From a desktop perspective, you can attach receipts. So for example, here we've got multiple receipts which are available to us. If for whatever reason you've saved a image onto your own desktop, you can also have that as a kind of a direct link onto your desktop. So for example, here I've got some images. I can attach those onto each individual line item and I can actually save this. So essentially this is going to do everything that I need it to. You can see the additional receipt images tabs as well. So the better example of this will be on our other report, as we've got real images actually supplied on there, potentially providing business purpose on here or supplier descriptions as well. So it might be Royal Mail as an example. You might put in the vendor. Okay, so I'm just going to submit this so it can go through to the manager. So when we log in as a default approver, for example, you'd be able to see the information which is visible for the approvals and the various different options. What you can also do, I'm just going to quickly show you this, is once you've submitted a claim, if you've realized, for example, you've made a mistake on an amount, you can actually recall this, which will bring it back into your own account, so you can potentially make amendments, because as you can see, once submitted, I can't actually amend any of the information. So you can just recall this back into your own profile, make any amendments. So if I knew it, for example, it was actually £15, I can save this and then resubmit it. And close that. So again, now what we've got two reports that are awaiting the approver, or three including the Craig Hands test as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to log out of the test user account and log into our approver account, just to show you how the approvals would actually be visible on the screen as well. So upon the login as the approver, what you can now see is there's actually an additional tab as well for approvals of expenditure. So what you can see on here is the quick view. So you can see the ones which currently are requiring your approval. So as we can see, is we have my October expenses, which we've created today. And in doing so, the approver can see any kind of warning messages which potentially have been incurred and may not have been dealt with. So the approver might say, okay, right, so I need to double check exactly why £120 was spent when the hotel limit, for example, is 110. So the approver has the option to look at the exception messages as well and just be clear as to why something's been potentially overclaimed. The main differences between the user action and the approver action is the additional options at the top. So we have the ability to send the expense lines back to the actual employee. So for example, if the approver notices that an amount's incorrect or they feel they need more information, they can press send back to employee. And what will happen is it will give you a comments field. So you could potentially comment on a particular item. So it could be that parking on the 29th or 20th of September has the incorrect amount associated. So what you can then do is, as an approver, send that back to the individuals, and therefore the user knows when they receive the report back, they need to take an action. So just for the purpose of the demonstration today, I won't actually send this one back. But what the key kind of items that I was going to show you will be is the information that the approver can see, potentially amend, add comments. So what the approver's action will be here really is to just ensure the expense line item is correct in comparison to the amounts and whatnot that have been populated. So there are a few options from a desktop perspective on how you can do this. You can open up the receipt images as I have at the moment, and you could scan the receipt and make sure that each individual line is populated with the correct amounts. So the 234, but you'll also have our Concur audit team doing this check on your behalf prior to a manager taking place. So essentially we're going to have an internal Concur audit team that we provide the service for, checking receipt images against what's being claimed, and also ensuring that it's within the company's policy. The managers can also do this check as well. So we've got various different options from a manager perspective. Again, if they wanted to have a look at the receipts in a different image or a different window, they could potentially do this. So they could have a long list of the receipts available to them, and they could check that in comparison to what is being claimed if necessary as well. So the approver will be able to see all of the information that the user was able to see when they created the lines. From a mileage perspective, for example, they could come in, have a look at the actual route which was taken. For example, if the user took a detour and had to go via Peterborough, for example, all the way to Manchester due to traffic, the manager will be able to see the route that's taken and evaluate the expenses based off of that information. They can check all of the attendees again. So for example, if we've got the meal that we went out for, the manager can see everyone who's attended the meal, and any of the various amounts and receipt images and whatnot that applies to those. So I'm going to approve this expense, and what I will do is I'm going to return the additional one which I had created, just so from a user perspective you can see how this appears to the users. So incorrect amount entered for the postage. So that's essentially sent it back to the individual. From an approver standpoint, what you can see in here is you can see any claims that you potentially approved in the past. So I today approved the October expenses. So essentially what I can then do is check where that is in the approval cycle as well. So as of yet, it's currently with the final step of the approval process, and that's going into the processor area. So that is the final step prior to the expenses being extracted out of the system and being pushed into kind of the payment cycle, which would then allow you to be reimbursed. So I'm going to log out quickly and just show you log back in as a user and just show you exactly how that return claim will appear to yourselves. So out of the open claims that we have, what you can see is this one has actually been returned. So it's quite clear, has returned stated in red text. In clicking on this, what will happen is you'll be able to see, for example, reasons behind why it's been returned. So you can either look at the audit trail or potentially look at comments. So if it has been returned, you can see why has it been returned. So in the event, for example, you've submitted an expense claim and it went into our audit queue and you put the incorrect date, for example, it would state here that it says Concur audit returned this expense line due to incorrect date, and it'll be quite clear as to what you need to amend within that expense line to then resubmit the claim ready for approval again. Is that all making sense? Okay. So final step of the process for expenses to be reimbursed, as I said, would be from a processor perspective. So this would be a small number of potential users within the business who will actually carry out this task. So what we'll do is we just quickly show you how that would appear as well. So we've got a processor login, which we're going to utilize. And essentially what will happen is this will look very different to what the approvers do. So the processor, which is the final step, will have to go into the expense tab, go into the process claims option, and you can run a query to see the claims ready for processing. So essentially what this is this will be the final approval step of the expenses life cycle. So what the processor can do is just double check things like tax is all being calculated correctly. So for example, here you've got a tax field which can be looked at by the processors, and just ensuring kind of a final check is taking place. They can then approve this expense report, send it back potentially, or send it back to an approver, in order just to make sure that they've carried out all the thorough checks. In approving that expense report, again, that would be the last step of this approval cycle, and it will be pushing through the expenses to then be reimbursed to yourselves. Essentially, that is kind of an end-to-end process of the actual expense cycle from a user perspective, from an approver's perspective, and finally a processing perspective. So is there any other areas of the system that anyone would like to see or would like me to quickly recap? Feel free to use the chat as well.
Is it possible to look at the approvers on the mobile?
Yes. So let me log back in on my mobile device, and I'll share that, and I'll show you exactly how you can do that too. It can be down to a preference. We'd always say look to utilize the mobile app where possible, especially from a user perspective. But yes, it is also possible to approve on the go on your mobile device as well. So I'm just going to share my screen on the mobile. And I will, can everyone see my screen? Is that okay? Mobile device? So I'm just going to sign out again. Yeah, okay, good. Just going to sign out again now and log into the approver for you. So that is TA. Oh, obviously, you won't have to, when you've got your own user accounts, you won't be logging in and out of different user accounts, because essentially your own permissions will be up to date with the necessary access that you need, whether it's a user access or approver access. So in the event where you are an approver, you won't need to be logging in and out. It'll just be your one account that'll be utilized for both claiming expenses and approving them. Okay, so upon the initial login to Concur, you will get some tips and tricks as well. So there are just some various options in here. From a mobile perspective, looking into it, as you can see, is that I have this approval option also available to me on the mobile device. I can click into that and I can see any reports that are awaiting my approval. So again, it's kind of that direct link between the desktop and the mobile device. You can utilize either or. And you can go in and double check the expenses. So you can see again any warning messages which have been applied to the expense claim. From an approval perspective, they might have some additional warning messages for them to check. But yes, so they can just go through the same way. They can have a look at that one's failed. But you can have a look at the actual mileage trips, for example, here. Have a look through. Make sure you're happy with the information which is being displayed. Also looking at any receipts. So example here is the locations, amounts, dates, any comments that might have been applied to it, transaction date. You can have a look at the receipt. So apologies, as this receipt is in portrait. And you can just make sure that you're happy with the information which is stated on here. So for example, this claim here is from the 16th of September, and you can see kind of amounts and whatnot, so 179.98, and it's exactly the same as what's on the the claims. So you've got the 16th of September and 179, for example, as the options there. They've actually added a business purpose, the vendor, where it's purchased, and so forth. And what you can then do at the bottom, you've got the various options with regards to sending it back to the employee. So if you press send back, you'll be required again to add a claim, add a comment, apologies, and or approve the expense and push it through to the next step of the approval flow. Is that okay? Any other questions?
Hi, can I I run a my own car.
Yep.
And obviously claim the approved mileage. But then obviously at the end of the year, I can also claim on the tax return. Does it keep a record of your mileage if you're tracking it day to day via the app? And how do you see that? So that at the end of the year, I can take a business mileage down and submit it to inland revenue.
So essentially what we would tend to recommend there is for the administration team to actually utilize our reporting tool in order to obtain that information on behalf of the user base. So essentially it will give you kind of the amount of business distance that you've incurred in your personal vehicle as an example. Mm-hmm. And we'll be able to download that in bulk for the entire user base, and you could potentially request that again from the administrators within the system. You could also potentially go into the various different claims that you've incurred and do a manual calculation if necessary. But again, I would recommend in that situation that you request it from the administrative team with regards to a direct report out of the system, which would show all of that distance incurred.
Okay, so you can just ask for a report at the end of the year then. Brilliant.
Yeah.
Thank you.
As a part of the business processes, that is probably one of the most common ones across the UK as well.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
All right. Any other questions from anyone? I know we've got 15 minutes, so still got some time.
Scanning receipts in different languages.
Yep. So our expense it tool is available in multiple languages, and we can definitely share those with you as well. So we've got a two-tier essentially approach. So it is supported in the vast majority of languages, especially obviously UK English, American, for example, where we've utilized it the most. I am just going to bring up the exact options that we had around this. So I'm just trying to find these for you. But you are able to do the expense it process, which I'll show today from scanning receipts across multiple different countries. So there are better optimized countries where obviously we've utilized it and have a lot more presence within. So there are some better regions than others. So I'll either, if I can't find it now, I'll definitely be able to share that with you and your wider user base as well. So we've essentially got a table that is available that we're able to identify, and let me just talk about those. So for example, our Optimize, which is essentially where we've had it in the market the most, there is over, I'd say, 25 countries where you can utilize the expense it feature. And there's still around 20 countries which are kind of emerging, so we're still getting used to the formatting of the receipts and the amounts and whatnot. But essentially, you'll still see a good optimization of that expense it tool in foreign currencies or foreign receipts as well. In the event where the expense it tool can't be utilized, you can still potentially create the expense manually and attach the receipt image to that line item. So I think I'm still sharing my screen as well. So essentially I can just pop those up onto the screen just for a quick visual and on behalf of the recording as well.
It's not sharing at the moment, Casey.
Okay. So yeah, so these are essentially the expense country tiering. So as you can see, the optimize on the left is where you'll see a very good performance of the expense tool. The emerging is where you might see a little bit of a reduction in the quality of the tool itself, but you will still be able to utilize it. Again, in the event where the image can't be read by the expense tool, whether the receipt image is very blurry or faint, for example, you still do have the ability to manually create that. Okay. Any other questions at all? Okay, perfect.
Just a quick one. A typical turnaround time for the audit process?
So the audit process, essentially what we work towards is a 72-hour goal. What that means is that it could potentially be completed in, for example, a day from an audit perspective. It's very quick. So we would tend to see on average it is probably between 48 hours and 72 hours as an average turnaround. So the approval flow will go from a user submitting it into that audit process, first of all, as the first check, in order to save the managers the checks, doing the checks themselves from a date perspective, from a policy perspective. So we're doing that all on your behalf within that 72-hour goal. Essentially, it goes from the audit team into the manager and then into the final processing area. Okay. And what I would do is I'll provide some collateral with regards to that kind of end-to-end process for you as well. And you can share that with a wider user base. Okay. Perfect. Any other questions? Okay, perfect. Okay, thank you, everyone. And if you have any questions, just feel free to pop them over. And Matt, I'll pass back to you just for any closing comments.
Yeah, thank you, Casey, and thank you for showcasing the system. Hopefully that has given you all a bit more of an understanding and hopefully will help as you begin to use the system. What I'm going to do, I'll stop the recording now whilst I remember, and I will send it across to Manuel. So yeah, once he's got that, I'll see if he can distribute it across to everyone on the call today and for those that weren't able to join. And as I mentioned, I think if there's any questions moving forward, don't hesitate to reach out to myself. Colette is typically the first point of contact. However, if she's unavailable, then I'll be here to help. So I think if there's no other questions, we'll wrap things up. And yeah, thank you all for your time. I hope it's been beneficial.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Cheers. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.